Welcome to the Playing Books podcast. So I want you to imagine stepping into a room where the air is just, completely drained of oxygen.
Oh, wow.
Right. The year is 1720 and the South Sea bubble has just burst.
Yeah, total chaos.
Utter chaos. The entire British financial system is just in ruins. I mean, thousands of people are bankrupt, and the government is essentially in free fall.
Which is putting it mildly, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. You have this one prominent politician who literally drops dead of a stroke while he's defending himself in the House of Lords.
Yep.
Another guy catches smallpox and dies just days after his own son commits suicide out of sheer public disgrace. I mean, it's brutal.
Like a political horror movie.
It really is.
Yeah.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer is expelled for corruption. He gets sent to the Tower of London.
Yeah.
So the men holding the reins of the British Empire are just completely wiped off the board in a matter of weeks.
Just gone.
Gone. And out of this massive vacuum, one man just quietly steps over the political corpses of his rivals, seizes the levers of power, and, well, essentially invents the modern job of running a country.
It is such a phenomenal origin story. And it really sets the perfect tone for what we're looking at today.
It totally does, because today we are going on this massive, thrilling exploration of this book, Biographical Dictionary of British Prime Ministers by Robert Eccleshall and Graham Walker.
Right.
We're going to trace the DNA of political leadership, power, and survival across, 3 centuries of British history.
Which is a huge undertaking.
It is. But our mission for this episode is to extract the hidden eccentricities, the brilliant tactical maneuvers, and honestly, the fatal flaws of the men and women who actually managed to capture and, survive the highest office in the land.
And I think it's important to point out,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
well, just that this isn't going to be some dry recitation of, legislative dates or constitutional treaties.
No, definitely not.
We're looking at the raw mechanics of ambition here.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, whether you're managing a team or navigating office politics or just trying to understand the nature of authority, I promise the lessons of survival and strategy we uncover today are going to profoundly impact how you view leadership in your own life.
That psychological lens is precisely what makes the text so valuable. I mean, the authors deliberately shift the historical focus away from the bureaucratic structures of the government.
Right, the boring stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, they examine the raw temperaments of these individuals when they're placed under unimaginable pressure.
Because when you strip away the pomp and the pageantry, what are you left with?
You're left with a fundamental question, which
Sure.
the book asks,
Yeah.
right? What specific psychological traits allow a human being to survive at the absolute pinnacle of power?
Yeah.
And conversely, what traits guarantee that they will eventually destroy themselves?
Right, because it always seems to end badly. When you trace the evolution of the Prime Minister's office from the 1700s to today, it reminds me of a startup company.
A startup.
Yeah, like a scrappy startup that accidentally becomes this massive, highly regulated global monopoly.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Because it starts out as this vague, totally undefined role. Like there was no job description. The first prime ministers were basically just guys managing the king's money and trying to put out parliamentary fires.
Yeah, they were fixers, basically.
Right. But over 300 years, through sheer precedent and improvisation, it evolves into this semi-presidential seat of just immense global power.
That startup analogy is actually quite fitting because there was absolutely no master plan.
Zero.
Yeah, there was never a moment where a constitutional convention sat down and said, here's the office of the prime minister and here are its statutory powers.
Right. No one wrote it down.
Exactly. It was entirely improvised out of political necessity.
And
And to understand the modern titan of politics, we really have to start with the man who capitalized on that 1720 financial crash you mentioned,
Sir Robert Walpole.
the man who essentially invented the game.
Yeah, we have to talk about the reluctant genesis of power here.
We do. But, even starting with Walpole requires us to navigate a bit of a historical debate.
Right, because was he actually the first prime minister?
Exactly. The book points out that there are definitely earlier candidates for the title. If you look at the reigns before George I, you have figures like the Earl of Godolphin or Robert Harley.
Right.
In fact, contemporaries often referred to Robert Harley in the early 1700s as a prime minister, though it was usually meant as an insult.
An insult, like her.
Like they were implying he was monopolizing the Queen's favor. It wasn't a compliment.
That is always so fascinating to me. If Harley was already doing the job of managing the government and literally getting called the prime minister, why does Walpole get the crown in the history books?
Right.
Like, what fundamentally separated Walpole's operation from the guys who came before him?
It really comes down to ideological ruthlessness and his total mastery of party machinery.
Okay, break that down.
Well, Harley, by his very instinct, tried to be a non-party manager. He believed in a broad, moderate coalition.
He wanted everybody to get along.
Basically, yeah. He wanted to bring reasonable Whigs and reasonable Tories together to just support Queen Anne's business.
Right.
Walpole, on the other hand, was a ferocious Whig Party loyalist. And he had a distinct environmental advantage, King George III.
Oh, right, because the king absolutely despised the opposition party, the Tories.
Despised them and deeply, deeply distrusted them. To give you some context, the Tories had recently flirted with the Jacobites.
Which were the exiled Catholic claimants to the throne, right?
Exactly. So for the new Hanoverian king, George I, the Tories represented a literal threat to his crown. They were dangerous.
And Walpole saw this right away.
He understood it instantly. He capitalized on the king's paranoia. He didn't just act as a servant to the monarch. He positioned himself as the absolute undeniable leader of the Whig Party.
Basically telling the king, I am the only thing standing between you and a revolution.
Yes, he fused royal favor with ruthless party discipline.
So let's examine that ruthlessness, because this is where the survival mechanics get really fascinating. Walpole wasn't even destined for the top spot.
No, he wasn't.
He was a junior partner. The guys actually running the show were Stanhope and Sunderland. And then the South Sea bubble happens in 1720.
The crash.
Right. And for those unfamiliar, the South Sea Company was essentially this massive public-private partnership. They took on the national debt, promised ridiculous returns based on a monopoly of trade with South America.
Which is mostly theoretical trade, mind you.
Exactly. It was a speculative mania. And when it crashed, it ruined the entire establishment. Like we said, Stanhope dies of apoplexy, Craigs dies of smallpox, the chancellor is locked up. It's a total wipeout of the executive suite.
The field was violently cleared. I mean, Sunderland barely survived, but his reputation was so damaged he had to resign his main posts.
Right.
And Walpole was one of the few who was untouched by the scandal.
But see, look at that sequence of events. It makes me question his genius a little bit. Was Walpole just incredibly lucky?
What do you mean?
Well, you see this in corporate history all the time. A mid-level executive suddenly becomes the CEO simply because the entire C-suite is indicted in an accounting fraud scandal and sent to federal prison.
Right.
The guy wasn't necessarily a visionary. He was literally just the last man standing in the boardroom with a clean record.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I would argue that luck is only the key that unlocks the door, you know. Ruthless competence is what keeps you inside the room once you cross the threshold.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes, the South Sea bubble was a stroke of immense fortune for his career trajectory. But Walpole didn't just passively inherit the premiership. He aggressively weaponized the political landscape to consolidate his power.
Do we have an example of that?
Absolutely. If you want proof of his active machinations, you just have to look at the Atterbury plot in 1722.
Okay, the Atterbury plot. This was the Jacobite conspiracy to overthrow the king, right?
Supposedly. Francis Atterbury was the Bishop of Rochester and a very prominent Tory leader. Walpole claimed to have uncovered this massive plot orchestrated by Atterbury to bring back the exiled king.
Was there actually a plot?
Well, Atterbury certainly had Jacobite sympathies. But the book reveals that Walpole essentially manufactured and exaggerated the evidence to secure Atterbury's banishment.
Wait, really? How did he manufacture it?
Oh, it's wild. He ran a highly sophisticated early 18th century surveillance network.
No way.
Yeah, he intercepted mail, he employed cryptographers to decode letters, and he presented highly circumstantial evidence.
Like what?
Well, he used the movements of a spotted dog named Harlequin to prove a treasonous correspondence.
You're kidding. A spotted dog?
A spotted dog. It was a brilliant, if highly unethical, tactical maneuver.
Wow.
By inflating this national security crisis, Walpole portrayed himself as the indispensable, zealous defender of the crown.
So he invents the crisis, plays the hero, and purges his rivals.
Exactly. It united the fractured Whig Party entirely behind him, completely discredited the remaining Tories by associating them with treason, and forced the king to rely on him absolutely. He created a crisis to cement his own monopoly on power.
It is staggering how modern that feels. And he also made a crucial, revolutionary structural decision about where power should physically sit, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He chose to stay in the House of Commons rather than doing what every successful politician before him did, which was take a peerage and move up to the House of Lords.
And that decision was arguably his greatest masterstroke. Prior to Walpole, The House of Lords was considered the seat of ultimate political prestige. That's where the power supposedly was.
Right.
But Walpole realized a fundamental truth of government.
Mm-hmm.
True power lies in controlling the money.
The purse strings.
Exactly. And the House of Commons controlled the supply. They controlled taxation. By intentionally remaining a commoner, he signaled that the lower house was where the government's business would be fought and won.
He basically laid down the unwritten constitutional rule that a modern prime minister has to command the Commons.
He absolutely did.
He really understood leverage. And his domestic policies were entirely designed to maintain that leverage. Like, he intentionally kept the political temperature as low as possible.
Right. Sleeping dogs lie.
Exactly. He kept Britain out of foreign wars, not necessarily because he was a pacifist, but because wars cost money.
And money means taxes.
Right. If you have a war, you have to raise the land tax.
Yeah.
If you raise the land tax, the wealthy gentry who control the commons get angry and vote you out.
It's a very simple equation.
It is. He also deliberately cooled down religious tensions so the Hanoverian succession wouldn't be threatened. He was essentially buying decades of stability.
He was the ultimate manager of risk.
Yeah.
But, the system Walpole built relied heavily on the personal favor of the king.
Right.
And as the decades passed, that system began to undergo a painful, bloody shift. The balance of political gravity started moving away from the monarch and decisively toward the parliament.
Which brings us into the later 18th century, the era of the crown's managers.
Yes.
And we really need to talk about those managers, specifically Lord North, because Lord North has one of the most toxic legacies in political history.
He really does.
When you hear his name, he's usually dismissed outright as the worst prime minister in British history because he happens to be the guy who lost the American colonies.
Yeah, that's a tough one to shake.
Right. He oversaw the American Revolution from London. That is a heavy, almost insurmountable historical burden to carry.
It is an immense burden. And popular history rarely forgives the man who loses an empire. But this text actually does significant work to rehabilitate Lord North's domestic reputation.
Really?
Yeah. The traditional oversimplified view is that North was just a pliable puppet for King George III. A yes man who blindly followed the king's disastrous colonial policies.
That's definitely what I was taught in school.
Right. But the book argues that is largely a myth. Within the context of the British Parliament, Lord North was an incredibly skilled manager.
Okay, you have to explain how someone who loses America is considered a skilled manager. What on earth was he doing right in London?
Well, he maintained a working government in an era of extreme factionalism. You have to remember, political parties as we know them today didn't exist in the same way.
They were just messy coalitions.
Exactly. Parliament was composed of shifting alliances, independent gentlemen, and various aristocratic factions. North kept them together not through Walpole-style ruthlessness, but through extraordinary financial competence and immense personal charm.
Charm.
Yes. He was a brilliant, witty, and highly popular debater in the House of Commons. Even his most fierce political opponents liked him personally because of his good-humored, self-deprecating wit.
That's so interesting. There's actually a fantastic quote in the book from Dr. Samuel Johnson that I think highlights the frustration people had with North's style of leadership.
Oh, yeah.
Johnson complains, "There is now no prime minister. There is only an agent for government in the House of Commons. We are governed by the cabinet, but there is no one head there, as in Sir Robert Walpole's time."
I find that quote so revealing. It perfectly captures the contemporary anxiety about how the office was evolving.
Yeah, Johnson wanted a strong man.
He wanted another Walpole who could just dictate terms. But North understood that the political climate had changed. He wasn't a dictator. He couldn't be. He was a consensus builder.
So he's managing the king above him and the fractured factions below him.
Precisely. Yes, the American policy was a catastrophe, but his ability to keep a government afloat for 12 years under those conditions required immense political agility.
It's the difference between being a wartime visionary and a parliamentary administrator.
Right.
And moving from the charming administrator, we hit a prime minister with a much darker, much more dramatic legacy. Spencer Perceval.
Yeah, it's Perceval.
He holds a very grim, unique claim to fame in British history.
He is the only British prime minister to have ever been assassinated.
Shot point blank in the chest in the lobby of the House of Commons in 1812.
By a bankrupt merchant with a grievance against the government, yes.
It is a shocking event. But the problem with Spencer Perceval is that his assassination tends to eclipse everything he actually did in office, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. To merely remember him as the victim of a murder is to miss his underlying significance to the evolution of the role.
So what makes him significant beyond his death?
Two main things. First, Percival was the first evangelical prime minister. He brought a strict, deeply religious morality to the highest office, which subtly began to change the tone of public life.
Interesting.
Second, and more importantly, he was a crucial transitional figure structurally. He guided the Tory party through a highly critical phase of the global war against Napoleon.
Which was no small feat.
Not at all. And in doing so, he shifted the nation closer to true parliamentary government. By successfully managing the war effort and the economy through the Commons, he further eroded the absolute dominance of the king.
Cementing the idea that the Prime Minister's primary accountability was to Parliament, not the Crown.
Exactly.
And his tragic death perfectly sets the stage for the man who had to pick up the pieces, Lord Liverpool.
Lord Liverpool, yes.
Now, I have to admit, I always laugh at how history, and specifically his successors, have treated Liverpool. Benjamin Disraeli later described Lord Liverpool as the arch mediocrity, who possessed nothing more than meager diligence.
It's harsh.
I mean, calling the leader of your country an arch mediocrity is just a brutal, surgical takedown.
It is one of the great historical insults. But again, the authors of this text urge us to look past the rhetoric. Disraeli was a romantic who prized flair and genius.
Right, and Liverpool was not that.
Liverpool had neither of those things. Yet, he served as prime minister for 15 unbroken years.
Wow.
That is an astonishingly long tenure. And he didn't serve during a quiet, easy time. He governed to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the massive economic depression that followed, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, and intense social unrest.
We are talking about the Luddites smashing machinery and the Peterloo Massacre. So I have to challenge this. If the country is going through violent industrial unrest, economic depression, and the aftermath of a global war, how does a guy universally recognized as a fussy, nervous mediocrity survive in power for a decade and a half?
It's a great question.
Why didn't they replace him with a visionary?
Because a visionary is exactly what the establishment did not want.
Really?
Think about it. When a country is undergoing that level of violent systemic transition, a visionary who wants to enact sweeping changes is terrifying.
Ah, that makes sense.
Liverpool survived precisely because of his exact disposition. He was detail-driven, cautious, nervous, and utterly unglamorous. He provided the exact type of boring stability the country desperately needed to anchor itself.
He was the shock absorber for the nation.
Exactly. Furthermore, his true genius lay in cabinet management. He wasn't the smartest man in the room, but he knew how to manage men who thought they were. He had a cabinet full of massive egos and brilliant minds figures like Castlereagh, Canning, and Wellington. Liverpool acted as the ultimate coordinator, keeping these prima donnas from tearing the government apart. It wasn't glamorous, but it was highly effective statecraft.
It seems like there is a cycle to this. There's a time for visionaries and a time for administrators.
Yeah, okay.
But Liverpool's long, stable, shock-absorbing reign really set the stage for two dramatic opposites who followed him. We have the brilliant tragic figure and the reluctant military hero. Let's explore George Canning first.
Canning is a phenomenal psychological study. Unlike the aristocratic elites who typically dominated politics, Canning was a man of relatively humble, somewhat scandalous origins.
His mother was an actress, right?
Yes, his mother was a stage actress, which was highly taboo at the time. Yet he possessed a sheer intellectual brilliance and oratorical skill that allowed him to force his way into the upper echelons of an aristocratic, ancient regime.
As I read his section in the book, he instantly reminded me of a highly talented outsider brought into a deeply nepotistic, old money family business.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
You know the exact dynamic. It's the guy who actually understands the market, who has the best ideas, who clearly knows how to save the company from bankruptcy. But he is constantly thwarted, undermined, and held back because the family insiders are deeply suspicious of him.
Right.
They don't like his aggressive style, they resent his brilliance, and they don't trust his background.
That analogy perfectly captures the friction of Canning's entire career. He consciously and openly aimed for the highest office, which in itself was seen as ungentlemanly ambition.
You weren't supposed to actually want it that badly.
No, you were supposed to be called to serve,
Well,
reluctantly. His own impetuous character, combined with the deep, snobbish suspicions of his aristocratic colleagues, kept him locked out of the premiership for decades.
wow.
He was brilliant, but volatile. And the ultimate tragedy of Canning is that after a lifetime of dramatic twists, resignations, and even fighting a duel with a cabinet colleague,
Wait, he fought a duel?
he did with Castlereagh, But anyway, he finally achieves the premiership in 1827.
He reaches the absolute summit, and then what happens?
He dies 4 months later.
Oh, man.
His health collapses under the strain of the office and a severe cold.
He finally gets the prize he spent a lifetime clawing toward, and it is instantly snatched away. It is almost Shakespearean.
It really is. And in losing him, the authors argue that Britain lost the one leader who might have smoothly handled the explosive coming crises over parliamentary reform.
Because he actually had the intellect for it.
Yes, he had the intellect and the flexibility to manage transition. Instead, his death left a massive political vacuum, and that vacuum was filled by a man who fundamentally hated politics.
The Duke of Wellington. The hero of Waterloo. The man who defeated Napoleon.
Wellington's tenure as prime minister is defined by a supreme, almost agonizing irony. You have to understand his core identity, right?
Yeah.
Wellington was a staunch, unyielding defender of the old aristocratic Protestant constitution. He believed in order and hierarchy above all else.
Okay.
Yet he is the prime minister who ends up forcing through Catholic emancipation, a measure that fundamentally altered that very constitution by allowing Catholics to sit in Parliament.
Okay, we need to dig into the mechanics of this. How does the ultimate arch-conservative, the guy who believes in the rigid Protestant hierarchy, end up passing the most sweeping reform of his era? What forces him to do it?
He approached domestic politics exactly like a military campaign on the Iberian Peninsula.
How so?
In 1828, a Catholic leader named Daniel O'Connell won a parliamentary election in County Clare, Ireland. Under the existing laws, as a Catholic, O'Connell couldn't legally take his seat.
Right.
Wellington looked at the intelligence on the ground and realized that if they denied O'Connell his democratic victory, it would trigger a massive, bloody civil war in Ireland.
So he calculates the casualties.
Precisely. He didn't pass Catholic emancipation out of some newfound liberal idealism or beliefs in religious equality. He executed a tactical retreat.
Wow.
He did it out of hard-headed, pragmatic necessity to maintain public order and prevent a war he knew Britain couldn't afford. He forced his own furious party and a weeping King George V to accept it. But in doing so, he completely shattered his own political base. The Tories felt utterly betrayed.
And his military personality was just disastrously unsuited for the daily grind of the office, wasn't it? Like, he was frank, stern, downright. He was a general who expected orders to be followed without question, not a politician who wanted to debate nuances.
He was completely bewildered by the concept of political opposition. He vastly preferred discussing logistics and military campaigns over navigating the emotions or the petty grievances of his cabinet.
I can imagine.
There's a famous story that after his first cabinet meeting as prime minister, he complained that it was an incredibly flawed system because, quote, I gave them their orders and they wanted to stay and discuss them.
That is hilarious.
His status as the living savior of the nation insulated him from facing the immediate consequences of his actual failure as a domestic political leader. He was a soldier drafted into a political war, and he detested every moment of it.
Which is such a brilliant contrast to the era that follows. If Wellington was the reluctant soldier who hated politics, the late 19th century belonged to two men who turned politics itself into a form of total ideological war.
Ah, yes.
I am talking, of course, about the great Victorian duel between Benjamin Disraeli and William Ewart Gladstone.
These two men entirely defined the Victorian era. Their personal hatred for one another shaped the modern two-party system.
So let's look at Disraeli first, because his ascent is arguably the most improbable in British history, right?
It really is. His background was totally unorthodox for a leader of the Conservative Party. He had middle-class Jewish origins, though he was baptized Anglican, in an era of intense casual anti-Semitism.
Right.
He was a flamboyant novelist who wore velvet suits and gold chains.
Yet, despite all of that, he fiercely identified with the aristocracy and the romantic pageantry of the British establishment. He was a brilliant myth maker.
He was.
And what I find fascinating is his afterlife. Long after Disraeli died, he became this legendary, almost sainted figure of one nation conservatism.
Right, the Primrose League.
Exactly. The Primrose League was founded in his honor and became a massive grassroots political machine. But I have to question the logic here. How does a man who fundamentally loved aristocratic pageantry, who flattered Queen Victoria relentlessly, get claimed by modern populace as a champion of the working man?
It is a brilliant paradox, and it goes to the heart of Disraeli's political genius.
Yeah.
Disraeli understood a demographic truth that totally eluded his rivals.
Which was?
The newly enfranchised, expanding working classes didn't necessarily want a revolution. They could be wooed by patriotic appeal, imperial glory, and a sense of shared national destiny.
Yes.
This is what he called one-nation conservatism. He bypassed the middle-class factory owners, who were mostly voting liberal, and formed a conceptual alliance between the ancient aristocracy at the top and the laborers at the bottom.
Binding them together with the romance of tradition and empire.
Exactly. He didn't sell them economic equality, he sold them a romantic, unifying vision of Great Britain.
And standing entirely opposite to that romanticism, almost like a prophet of judgment, was William Ewart Gladstone,
Yes.
the moral crusader.
Disraeli was theatrical and pragmatic. Gladstone was driven by an intense, almost terrifying Christian moralism.
He viewed every political issue from the budget to foreign policy as a literal battle between absolute good and absolute evil.
Yes, the book provides a stunning quote from Gladstone's diary that captures his psychological essence perfectly. Truth, justice, order, peace, honor, duty, liberty, piety, all the rest is summed up in miserere.
Miserere, meaning have mercy.
Yes.
That is incredibly heavy. He didn't just carry a political platform, he carried the weight of the world's morality on his shoulders.
And he truly believed it was his divine duty to do so. He became the global icon of liberalism. His influence was so massive and his moralistic approach to foreign affairs was so intense that Otto von Bismarck, the architect of cynical realpolitik in Germany, actively despised him.
Wait, why did Bismarck hate him so much?
Because Gladstone represented everything Bismarck thought was dangerous in statecraft. Bismarck believed foreign policy should be dictated strictly by national interest, balance of power, and military reality.
Right.
Gladstone believed foreign policy should be dictated by human rights and moral crusades, such as his fierce campaign against the Ottoman Empire over the Bulgarian atrocities.
I see.
Bismarck saw Gladstone's moralizing as naive, unpredictable, and deeply destabilizing to the European order. It is the ultimate clash of worldviews, the cynical pragmatist versus the righteous crusader.
The exhaustion of that burning righteous intensity brings us to a sharp pivot. After Gladstone's moral crusades, the country seemingly wanted a break, returning to an era of relaxed aristocratic detachment.
Yeah, they were tired.
We move into the era of Lord Salisbury and A.J. Balfour.
This period at the turn of the 20th century is often referred to as the era of the Hotel Cecil, referencing the Cecil family's total dominance over the government.
Right.
Lord Salisbury Robert Gascoigne Cecil was prime minister for nearly 20 years across 3 terms, and his management style was astonishingly, almost comically, hands-off.
He essentially hated interfering in anything, didn't he?
He truly did. He possessed a profound aristocratic pessimism. He believed most political action did more harm than good.
Really?
Yeah, he would literally let his cabinet outvote him on domestic issues and just shrug and accept the defeat.
That's amazing.
His general strategy was to do as little as legally possible domestically, as long as he was left completely alone to manage foreign policy, which is his true passion and area of expertise.
So he just checked out of domestic issues entirely.
Pretty much. He was, notably, the last prime minister to run the country from the House of Lords. He didn't even bother mingling in the Commons.
And when he finally retires, he hands the keys to the kingdom over to his nephew, Arthur Balfour. Literally, this is the origin of the phrase, Bob's your uncle.
Yes.
Because Prime Minister Robert Lord Salisbury gave his nephew the top job.
It was the absolute zenith of aristocratic nepotism.
Mm-hmm.
Balfour was highly intellectual, a philosopher by nature, and incredibly elusive. He managed the Conservative Party and the cabinet like it was a weekend house party at a country estate.
Wow.
The book notes a very revealing detail. Balfour was actually the first prime minister to be addressed by his first name, Arthur, in cabinet meetings by his colleagues.
That reflects how tight, cliquey, and aristocratic that circle was. They weren't colleagues, they were family friends running an empire.
Precisely. But that relaxed, aristocratic grip was about to violently collide with the realities of the 20th century.
Yeah.
The masses were mobilizing, trade unions were rising, and the old patrician style was becoming obsolete. Which brings us to the liberal who broke the mold, Henry Campbell Bannerman.
Campbell Bannerman represents a fascinating shift. He was the first modern prime minister to project a distinctly non-metropolitan provincial image.
Right, he wasn't part of that club.
He wasn't part of that glittering, cynical London high society of the Hotel Cecil. He was wealthy, absolutely, but he was a Scottish outsider in many ways.
He paved the way for later outsiders by proving you didn't need to be a London aristocrat to command the country.
Yeah.
And he was incredibly effective.
Oh, for sure.
His 1905 Albert Hall speech is highlighted by the authors as a masterclass in political communication. He went on the offensive, connecting the defense of free trade, economic recovery, and the promise of social reform into one coherent, devastating message against the conservatives.
And it worked.
It set up the massive liberal landslide victory in 1906.
But his health failed him quickly, and he was soon replaced by a generation of men who would have to navigate the unprecedented explosion of the First World War. Foremost among them, the Welsh wizard, David Lloyd George.
Lloyd George is a seismic figure. The war required a level of dynamic energy that the old system simply couldn't produce.
When I read the chapters on Lloyd George in this book, Biographical Dictionary of British Prime Ministers by Robert Eccleshall and Graham Walker, I am instantly reminded of a modern American wartime president.
Oh, absolutely.
He completely bypassed traditional, sluggish cabinet structures. He created his own inner war cabinet of trusted allies.
Right.
He utilized his sheer charisma, his soaring emotional rhetoric to rally a nation that was bleeding to death in the trenches of the Western Front.
The presidential analogy is highly accurate. Lloyd George realized that the old parliamentary machinery was too bureaucratic and slow for total mechanized war.
It just couldn't keep up.
No, it couldn't. So he centralized absolute power around himself. Furthermore, he had a middle way vision. He tried to bypass the old rigid party lines to create a permanent national coalition.
And he had a ton of success with that initially.
Between 1916 and 1922, his personal ascendancy over British politics was immense. He was universally known as the man who won the war.
But there is a massive hangover effect. The physical and emotional exhaustion of World War I required a new type of leader for the peace.
Yes, the pendulum swung back.
The public was tired of the high drama, the constant crises, and the dynamic, almost exhausting charisma of Lloyd George. They wanted safety. They wanted a return to normalcy.
And ironically, the men who promised safety ended up delivering the nation into the hands of an even more devastating global catastrophe.
We are speaking, of course, of the interwar neuroses of the 1920s and 30s, the era defined by Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain.
Yes.
Let's start with Baldwin, the nervous centrist. It is wild how his historical reputation has whiplashed over the decades.
It really has.
During World War II, George Orwell famously called Baldwin a hole in the air. The public perception was that he was just this lazy, indolent guy smoking a cherrywood pipe, leaning on a gate, and looking at pigs in the countryside while Hitler rearmed Germany.
That was his carefully cultivated public persona. The honest, simple, unthreatening countryman. It was a deliberate antidote to the frantic energy of Lloyd George.
Right.
But the authors revealed that the reality was entirely different. Behind closed doors, Baldwin was a brilliant, if highly neurotic, political coordinator. He was deeply insecure, constantly analyzing the public mood.
He literally had a severe nervous breakdown in 1936.
Yes, the sheer physical and psychological toll of the office was crushing him. Baldwin was managing a deeply fractured post-war society, dealing with the general strike, the abdication crisis of King Edward VIII, and the rising extremes of fascism and communism.
That's a lot to handle.
It was too much. He had this absolute non-negotiable need to escape to Eladon in France for a month every single year. He would cut himself off totally from politics, reading no newspapers, just to maintain his sanity.
Oh, wow.
He wasn't lazy. He was a fragile man expending immense psychological energy to keep the country in the moderate center.
And when he finally steps down, we get Neville Chamberlain, the man associated forever with one word: appeasement.
Chamberlain is a deeply complex, often misunderstood character.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Unlike Baldwin, who shrank from administrative detail, Chamberlain was a tireless workhorse. He thrived on bureaucratic responsibility. He was an excellent, detail-oriented administrator, especially during his highly successful time as Minister of Health.
Right, he was competent.
Very. But in personal contacts, he was painfully shy, socially awkward, and incredibly cold.
So here is the multi-million-dollar historical question. We have a guy who is administratively brilliant, highly intelligent, and capable of mastering complex policy. How does someone like that make the ultimate fatal blunder of trusting Adolf Hitler at Munich in 1938?
Right.
How does that mechanism of failure work?
The book argues that it happened because Chamberlain's self-confidence in his own administrative ability mutated into a dangerous vanity. Yes. Chamberlain believed so utterly in his own capacity to rationally solve problems that he thought he could personally negotiate with dictators. Because he was socially rigid, he despised the traditional diplomatic experts in the Foreign Office who kept telling him Hitler couldn't be trusted.
So he just cut them out of the loop.
Entirely. He bypassed the institutional knowledge of the state. He relied instead on sycophantic yes-men, Most notably, his chief industrial advisor, Sir Horace Wilson, who had no foreign policy experience.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. Chamberlain placed absolute faith in his own personal diplomacy, flying to Germany 3 times, convinced that his rational, businesslike approach could tame Hitler's irrational aggression.
Unbelievable.
It was tragic, catastrophic overconfidence. He thought he was closing a corporate merger. Hitler was planning a war of annihilation.
The sheer failure of that personal diplomacy paved the way for the mid-century titans. The crisis of 1940 brings in the most legendary prime minister of all time, Winston Churchill, and sets up his surprising successors.
When analyzing Churchill through the lens of this book, we have to meticulously strip away the post-war mythology.
Yeah, because today, Churchill is universally revered as the greatest Englishman. He is cast in bronze.
Literally and figuratively.
But the reality of his political career up until 1940 was very different, right? For decades, the political establishment viewed him as a dangerous, undisciplined maverick.
Exactly. He was a party hopper who changed sides twice. He was viewed as a man of erratic judgment, haunted by the disaster of Gallipoli in World War I.
But the moment demanded a maverick. His wartime rhetoric was exactly the weapon the nation needed. He mobilized the English language and sent it into battle.
He did.
But the book makes a fascinating, counterintuitive point about that rhetoric. It argues that his soaring speeches actually created a nostalgic standard that haunted and paralyzed Britain for decades afterward.
Yes, Churchill's rhetoric set a bar of imperial greatness and global supremacy that a post-war, bankrupt Britain could no longer sustain economically or militarily.
It was a fantasy.
He painted a picture of a world power that no longer existed, making the inevitable imperial decline much more psychologically painful for his successors.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath of the war. In 1945, the British voters overwhelmingly reject Churchill at the ballot box and bring in the Labour leader, Clement Attlee.
The contrast between these two men could not be more extreme.
It is the ultimate clash of archetypes. You have the bombastic romantic legend of Churchill versus the cult of anonymity embodied by Attlee.
Yes, Attlee was quiet, diminutive, bald, and deeply uncharismatic. He looked and sounded like a small-town bank manager.
Yet, when you look at the ledger of history, the massive scale of his government's achievements is staggering. Attlee oversees the creation of the National Health Service, the founding of the NATO alliance, the establishment of the welfare state, and the granting of independence to India.
It's an incredible record.
How does a guy with zero charisma push through the most radical domestic agenda of the 20th century?
Because Attlee's style of leadership was the absolute antithesis of the modern, charismatic presidential prime minister. He didn't try to dominate the headlines or dazzle the public. He acted as a silent, ruthless chairman of the board. He managed a cabinet full of brilliant, massive, often conflicting egos heavyweights like Ernest Bevin at the Foreign Office and Aneurin Bevan at Health.
And how did he handle them?
Attlee just sat back, puffed his pipe, stopped them from talking over each other, and let them do the actual work. He steered the ship of state with incredibly few words. He was the ultimate facilitator of talent.
But eventually, the conservatives claw their way back into power. Churchill has his twilight years in the early 50s, and then we get the era of Anthony Eden and Harold Macmillan.
Yes.
And this is the moment where the imperial delusions fostered by Churchill finally violently shatter.
Anthony Eden is a deeply tragic figure. He had been the golden boy of the Conservative Party. He waited patiently in Churchill's shadow for over a decade as the designated heir.
Right.
And when he finally got the top job in 1955, his premiership was utterly destroyed a year later by the Suez Crisis.
We need to explain the mechanics of Suez, because it's the defining moment of modern British decline. The Egyptian president, Nasser, nationalizes the Suez Canal. Eden decides he is going to take it back by force.
Eden was perhaps the last prime minister to genuinely, fundamentally believe that Britain was still a truly independent world power capable of unilateral imperial action.
He thought he was Churchill.
He did. He colluded secretly with France and Israel to launch an invasion of Egypt to seize the canal. He thought he was standing up to a new Hitler.
But he forgot to check with the real boss, the United States.
He didn't secure American backing. President Dwight D. Eisenhower was furious at this imperial adventure, especially on the eve of a U.S. election.
Right.
But Eisenhower didn't use military force to stop Britain. He used financial weaponry. The U.S. threatened to block Britain's access to the IMF and began selling off sterling bonds, which caused an immediate catastrophic run on the British pound.
America basically threatened to bankrupt Britain in a matter of days.
Britain was broken by American economic reality. It was a brutal public humiliation that proved Britain was now a junior partner to the U.S.
That broke him.
The stress of the disaster physically broke Eden, forcing his resignation due to severe ill health. And the man who replaced him, Harold Macmillan, orchestrated what the authors describe as a masterful, almost clinical political takeover.
It reads exactly like a ruthless boardroom coup. The story in the book detailing Macmillan's rise is incredible. The conservative cabinet has to decide who takes over, Harold Macmillan or the widely favored Reb Butler.
Right.
But they don't have a formal leadership election. Instead, the grandees of the party take control. Lord Salisbury, the grandson of the prime minister we talked about earlier, pulls the cabinet ministers into a room in the Privy Council offices one by one.
This story is amazing.
Now, Salisbury had a very pronounced speech impediment where he couldn't pronounce his R's, so he simply sits there, looks at each minister, and asks a two-word question, Wob or Hywald?
Wob or Hywald, and the cabinet, to the surprise of many, chose Hywald.
They went with Macmillan.
Macmillan was far more ruthless and politically agile than Butler. Macmillan brought a sort of Edwardian middle-range greatness to the office. He was witty, deeply intelligent, and managed the rapid, inevitable decline of the British Empire with a certain unflappable, aristocratic flair.
He realized the game was up.
He recognized the wind of change in Africa and accepted decolonization. He was also a sharp critic of the economic orthodoxies that came later. In the 1980s, observing the massive privatization of state assets, he famously criticized the policies as selling off the family silver.
Which brings us perfectly into the modern crucible. By the 1960s and 70s, the aristocratic grip on the premiership is finally broken. We enter an era of bitter polarization, severe economic chaos, and the rise of conviction politics.
The era of Harold Wilson and Edward Heath.
Let's start with Wilson.
Harold Wilson presents a fascinating dual image in historical analysis. To his detractors, he was a Machiavellian opportunist, a man with no core principles, who survived merely by playing the different ideological factions of the Labour Party against each other. To his defenders, he was a benign, highly skilled pragmatist who managed to keep a fractured country together during a period of intense social and economic transition without resorting to extremism.
He also generated an endless amount of paranoia and conspiracies, especially regarding his shock resignation in 1976. He just walked away from power.
People couldn't believe it.
People were convinced MI5 was plotting a coup against him, or that the KGB had compromising material on him.
The conspiracy theories were rampant, fueled by the sheer secrecy of his inner circle. While the truth, as the book suggests, was likely a much more mundane human reality, a mix of absolute physical exhaustion and his own private awareness of the early onset of cognitive decline.
He knew he was losing his edge.
He did. He was followed in the 70s by the conservative Edward Heath, who was a dominant, stubborn personality ultimately ruined by global economic shifts.
Heath is a monumental figure for one specific reason. He took Britain into the European Economic Community, the precursor to the EU. That was a massive historic pivot, reorienting Britain away from the empire and towards Europe. But domestically, he completely failed to manage the power of the trade unions.
It was a disaster.
The coal miners went on strike, the power grid failed, and Britain was literally put on a 3-day work week to save electricity. Heath called a snap election asking the public, who governs Britain? The government or the unions?
And the voters essentially said, well, not you.
Exactly. Heath's failure to modernize the post-war corporate state, the system where government, business, and powerful unions negotiated national policy, paved the way for total political polarization.
And the arrival of a politician who intended to smash that consensus entirely.
Margaret Thatcher. And as we discuss Margaret Thatcher, I want to explicitly state to you, the listener, that we are remaining entirely impartial here.
Absolutely.
We are simply reporting the historical analysis provided in the text. We are not taking any left-wing or right-wing sides regarding Thatcher's policies. We are just looking at the mechanics of power.
And the book provides a very clear-eyed analysis of Thatcher as the ultimate evangelical outsider. To understand her, you have to understand her origins.
Right.
She did not come from the wealthy landowning aristocracy. She was born in Grantham, the daughter of a Methodist grocer, known early in her life as Snobby Roberts for her intense ambition. She also had a professional background as a research chemist.
Which made her the first prime minister with a science degree. How did those origins shape her political methodology?
Her background fundamentally immunized her against the patrician aristocratic Tory guilt regarding wealth.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the old upper-class conservatives often operated on a sense of noblesse oblige, a paternalistic duty to care for the poor, which after WWII translated into accepting the massive welfare state and the power of the unions.
Right, they felt bad about being rich.
Exactly. Thatcher despised that consensus. Because of her grosser background, she viewed the national economy strictly like a household budget. She possessed an evangelical, absolute fervor to dismantle the corporate state, crush the power of the unions, and unleash free enterprise.
She was incredibly combative. Her management style wasn't about building consensus like Lord North or Lord Liverpool.
Yep.
For Thatcher, you were either one of us or you were the enemy.
Yeah.
She didn't want compromise. She wanted total victory. But the fascinating part of her story is that the exact combativeness that allowed her to win 3 elections is the precise mechanism that brought her down.
Her downfall was entirely triggered from within her own ranks. Over 11 years, her autocratic style increasingly alienated her closest, most loyal allies. She stopped listening.
And then the final blow.
The fatal blow wasn't delivered by the opposition party. It was a devastating resignation speech in the House of Commons by her mild-mannered former Chancellor and Deputy Prime Minister, Geoffrey Howe.
He used that incredible, lethal cricket metaphor. He stood up in the Commons and explained that trying to negotiate in Europe under Thatcher was like being a batsman sent to the crease to represent your country, only to find that the team captain had deliberately broken your bats before the game began.
It was a staggering indictment of her leadership style from a man who had been by her side for a decade. It broke the spell of her invincibility, triggering a leadership challenge.
And when she was eventually forced out by her own cabinet, John Major emerged from the wreckage as the lucky survivor.
Yes, John Major.
Major's rise was so sudden and surprising. It's interesting because Thatcher didn't even initially see him as one of us early in his career because they clashed over economic policy. So I have to ask the Walpole question again. Was Major just incredibly lucky to be standing there when Thatcher fell, while the other big beasts of the party destroyed each other in the leadership contest?
It was a potent combination. There was certainly intense luck regarding the timing of other candidates' missteps, but it also required his own genuine, quiet administrative ability to capitalize on that luck.
He wasn't just a placeholder.
No, Major was a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal, which allowed him to appeal to different wings of the party. He managed to navigate a deeply, violently fractured conservative party for 7 years, winning a surprise election in 1992. His tenure required immense tactical skill and patience, even if it lacked the theatrical, terrifying fireworks of his predecessor.
When you step back and look at this entire journey through the book, from Walpole to Major, there is a meta-theme that bubbles just under the surface of every single chapter.
Yeah.
It's the sheer, brutal, physical, and psychological toll of this office.
You see it everywhere, in almost every century, from Walpole having to invent paranoid plots to stay relevant, to Canning dying 4 months into the job, to Baldwin's nervous breakdowns and desperate escapes to France.
To Eden's physical collapse under the stress of Suez.
Exactly, all the way to Thatcher's sleepless combativeness that eventually isolated her from reality. The pressure of the premiership is fundamentally inhuman.
Which leads me to this final provocative thought for you, the listener, to explore on your own. What if the very psychological traits required to attain the highest office, the relentless ambition, the supreme self-belief, the borderline vanity, the willingness to destroy rivals, are the exact same traits that guarantee a leader will eventually isolate themselves and orchestrate their own downfall?
It's a paradox.
It is. Think about that paradox. Look at the leaders in your own life, in your workplace, your community, your government. Which of these historical archetypes do they fit? Are they the reluctant manager, the paranoid visionary, the quiet chairman? Use the lessons from this episode to deeply enhance your own understanding of power, ambition, and survival in your daily life.
It is a profound question. The mechanics of power explored by the authors transcend British history. They apply directly to human nature and the realities of leadership today.
Absolutely. Now, I want to explicitly ask all of you listening to go out and purchase this book, Biographical Dictionary of British Prime Ministers by Robert Eccleshall and Graham Walker. It is an incredible, essential resource for understanding how power actually operates.
It really is a must-read.
Please engage with the authors on social media, ask them questions about these historical figures, and keep this vital conversation going. We want you to be active participants in this history. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the podcast. We invite you to follow, subscribe, and share the Plain Books podcast with anyone who loves a great story about the raw realities of power. Until next time, keep exploring the hidden forces that shape our world.